This quilt was called a Daffodil quilt. It actually was just a quilt top that my grandmother, Cassie Kollinger, which was my mom's mom, we found among her things after she passed away. She passed away when she was only 52 years old due to complications from leukemia. I was 12. She was always a very special and dear person in my life because she gave me extra physical attention that I didn't ordinarily get. She would get me up on her lap even though I was a big old youngin', and she would brush and fix my hair and put braids in it. People back then didn't call it braiding though, they called it plaiting. And she would fix it in pigtails like that, and it just made me feel real good. Her and my papaw, once a month, they would go to trade, and while they was gone, she'd always pick me up as something special and bring it back to me. It wasn't anything expensive or big or anything. It was just either like a book of paper dolls or just a coloring book or maybe just a box of crayons. But it meant a whole lot to me to know that she took the time to bring me something. It made me feel special. Anyway, one of the big reasons that this quilt means so much to me is because after we found that quilt top, my mother, Anna Sue Short, and my grandmother on my dad's side, Winnie Short, got together and they quilted it out for me and gave it to me to keep. And so I have a special piece of each one of my grandmothers and my mother in this quilt, and that's why it means so much. I've been surrounded most of my entire life by people who quilt. I can remember my mother bringing me down to my grandmother, Cassie Kollinger's house for quilting bees. Most of the women would gather there in the community around where my grandma lived, and they would get together for quilting bees. And that's where they would tell stories and laugh and gossip and cut up. It was just a good time of getting together with women folk. They would also, other women would bring their children, little children, because most of us weren't in school. We was just tiny, and they would spread out one of the finished quilts maybe on the floor, and they called that a pallet. And us babies, they would lay them down, for a nap in the afternoon. But the quilting frames, I can remember I was so small that I could stand up and underneath of them, and I would play up and under there. So I wasn't very big at all, because if you know quilting frames, they're not that far off the ground because you have to sit around them in order to quilt. So I can just always remember being surrounded by people that quilt, and it means a lot to me. My mother, she quilted up until she died, and she was only 68 years old when she passed, but I used to come and try to help her with her quilts. I would put them together usually for her, and then I would help her quilt them out sometimes, and not always, but sometimes if I had the time. And she and I would, share stories and kind of carry on the tradition of quilting, the quilting bee. And I'm hoping one of these days that my own daughter, might take a love of doing something like this and quilting and wanting to do her own thing with quilts, because I think it's a wonderful, cherished art form from the mountains, and I just hope to carry that along. I think young people, they need to be aware and be appreciative of the old ways and pass those traditions along.